The atmosphere in the studio grew tense as Vice President Kamala Harris stepped in. On the screens of millions of viewers, a special interview was about to unfold, but everyone understood this was no ordinary conversation. The host, Marcus, known for his sharp bias style, had meticulously prepared to put Harris in a difficult position. This wasn't going to be an open exchange, it was an intellectual battleground. Marcus watched Harris closely as she walked onto the stage. He forced a friendly smile, but his eyes betrayed his anticipation of an ambush. Behind the scenes, his assistants whispered among themselves, observing Harris with a mix of curiosity and caution. They knew she was experienced, but could she withstand the calculated attack awaiting her? Harris approached, shook Marcus's hand with remarkable composure, and took her seat. There was no sign of tension, only confidence, only calm. Meanwhile, Marcus cleared his throat, leaned forward, and spoke in a deliberately measured tone. "Welcome, Vice President Kamala Harris." The way he emphasized each word made his intentions clear. This was not going to be a neutral conversation. Harris simply nodded, waiting for Marcus's opening move. The entire room could feel it. A battle had just begun. And what Marcus hadn't expected was that this battle had already tilted in Kamala Harris's favor from the very first moment. Marcus gripped his stack of notes tightly, flipping through the pages with a knowing smirk. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment he could corner Kamala Harris in front of millions of viewers. Slowly he looked up, his gaze sharp and calculated before delivering his first strike. "Mrs. Harris," Marcus said, deliberately stretching out his words to heighten the tension, "you were once one of President Trump's strongest critics, yet now you have become one of his closest allies. Some would call that political opportunism. What do you say to that?" The question dropped like a perfectly laid trap. The studio fell silent, every eye fixed on Kamala Harris, waiting for a moment of hesitation, a minor slip that could dominate the headlines the next day. Some in the audience smirked, believing she wouldn't escape this one. But Harris didn't blink. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady, sharp, yet completely composed. "I'm glad you brought that up, Marcus," she replied, her voice unwavering, "because it gives me the opportunity to talk about something the media often overlooks, the right to change when confronted with the truth." A soft murmur rippled through the studio. This wasn't an evasion. This was a direct counterattack. Harris continued, her voice growing stronger. "I grew up in a working-class family. I saw firsthand how the system failed so many people. When I criticized President Trump, I was looking at everything through my own narrow lens. But when I saw what he actually accomplished, jobs returning, the economy recovering, communities that had been forgotten now filled with hope, I realized I had been wrong. And the most honorable thing a person can do is admit when they were wrong." Marcus clenched his stack of papers, realizing his trap had been dismantled before it could even be sprung. Marcus gritted his teeth, acknowledging he had underestimated his opponent. He hadn't expected Harris to push back with such force, but he wasn't easily defeated. With a knowing arch of his brow, he swiftly flipped to another page in his notes, preparing his next attack. "So according to you, changing political stances isn't opportunism, but rather admitting a mistake?" Marcus deliberately emphasized the last two words, twisting Harris's response. "If that's the case, are you saying that everyone who criticizes Trump is wrong and should change their views just like you did?" The audience stirred. Some nodded at Marcus's question. It was a clever strike, designed to either force Harris into contradiction or make her appear arrogant. But Harris remained unfazed. She tilted her head slightly, a sharp glint flashing in her eyes. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice steady yet authoritative. "What I'm saying is that we must have the humility to admit when reality changes, and more importantly, we must never let our pride blind us from the truth." Marcus faltered for a moment. He hadn't expected such a composed, cutting response. Harris pressed on. her gaze locking onto Marcus like a reverse interrogation. "Have you ever changed your opinion after learning new facts, Marcus?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Or do you believe that clinging to the same viewpoint, no matter how much the world changes, is a sign of intelligence?" The question struck like a blade. Marcus froze for a brief second. The air in the studio seemed to thin. Some audience members even sat up straighter, sensing that the tide of this battle had shifted entirely in Harris's favor. Marcus swallowed hard, trying to mask his discomfort. He hurriedly flipped through his notes, searching for a way to reclaim control. "So, are you saying that everyone has to agree with you? That anyone who refuses to change their stance is simply wrong?" Harris let out a subtle, knowing smile. "No, Marcus," she replied. "I'm saying that the truth doesn't belong to anyone. It exists independently of our opinions, and if you refuse to acknowledge reality simply because you hate changing your mind, then that's not principle. That's just stubbornness." At this moment, the audience began to applaud. Marcus clenched his teeth. He had failed once again. Gripping his pen tightly, he felt the sting of defeat creeping into his mind. He knew he had to regain control before Harris completely dominated the discussion. Flipping through his notes hastily, he decided to shift gears, launching another strike, one he believed would put Harris on the defensive. "All right, Kamala," Marcus said, his voice sharpening. "You talk about truth and principles, yet you once stated at an event that faith should have a role in politics. But isn't the U.S. Constitution clear about the separation of church and state? Don't you think you're overstepping?" The studio fell silent. Every eye turned to Harris, waiting to see if she would stumble. Marcus knew this was a sensitive topic. Any misstep could lead to criticism from both those who demanded a secular government and those who saw faith as the foundation of America. But Harris didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, then slowly leaned back in her chair, her sharp gaze locking onto Marcus. "Marcus, I'm glad you asked that." She paused, letting her words carry weight. "But let me remind you of something. When I took my oath of office, I placed my hand on a Bible, not a government report." The audience erupted in applause, but Harris wasn't finished. "And do you know what's interesting, Marcus?" she continued, tilting her head slightly, her tone turning razor-sharp. "When I was in the Marine Corps, no one objected when a chaplain prayed before every mission. No one had a problem when we knelt to ask God to protect our brothers and sisters in service. But now, when a leader simply acknowledges faith, suddenly it's a problem?" A tense silence filled the studio. Marcus swallowed hard. He hadn't expected Harris to turn the tables so quickly. "Faith is not a threat to government," Harris continued, her voice strong but not confrontational. "It is, in fact, the foundation of this nation. And let's be clear. Nowhere in the Constitution does it demand the removal of religion from public life. It simply ensures that no one is forced into a particular belief." The audience erupted into applause once more, this time even louder than before. Marcus glanced at his production team, desperately hoping for a cue, a way out. But none of them could save him now. Harris leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Marcus. "Then let me ask you something, Marcus. Do you think George Washington was wrong when he mentioned God in his inaugural address? Do you think Abraham Lincoln shouldn't have prayed for the nation during the Civil War? Or do you believe that every soldier who sacrificed for this country should have left their faith behind?" Marcus opened his mouth but found no words. Harris smiled slightly, but her eyes were as sharp as a blade. "I'm not imposing faith on anyone, Marcus. I'm simply saying it shouldn't be discarded, and if you think otherwise, maybe it's you who's trying to impose your views on others." Thunderous applause erupted. Marcus felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The interview was taking a turn he hadn't anticipated. Marcus took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. The conversation was slipping from his grasp faster than he had expected. The question about religion was supposed to be a perfect trap, but Kamala Harris had turned it into a speech on faith and America's history. He needed a counterattack, one sharp enough to regain control. Flipping through his notes quickly, his eyes flickered with renewed determination. "Very clever, Kamala," he said, forcing a smile, though there was a strain in his voice. "But let's talk about something more practical. You keep emphasizing tradition and moral values, but this country can't stay stuck in the past. Isn't America a nation of innovation and progress? Aren't you clinging to an era that has long passed instead of looking toward the future?" The audience sat up straighter, waiting for Harris's response. Marcus believed he had asked an inescapable question, one that could push Harris into a defensive stance, but he had underestimated his opponent. Harris smiled faintly, but her eyes had never been sharper. "Marcus, you talk about progress, but let me ask you, progress in which direction?" She paused for a moment, letting her question hang in the air. "If progress means dismantling the family structure, erasing faith, disregarding patriotism, and turning America into a place where its people no longer recognize their own country, then that is not progress, that is a loss of identity." The studio fell into complete silence. A few in the audience nodded, while Marcus subtly tightened his grip on his pen. Harris continued, her voice growing stronger. "Progress does not mean erasing the values that built America. It means building upon them to create a better future. When we discard history, dismiss the lessons our ancestors left behind, we are not moving forward, we are moving backward." Marcus let out a small chuckle, trying to appear confident. "So you're saying that old values are unchangeable? You don't think the world is evolving and that we need to adapt?" Harris leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with intensity. "Adaptation does not mean abandoning what is right. Adaptation means knowing what to preserve and what to improve. Do you believe that patriotism, family responsibility, honesty, and hard work are outdated? Because if so, then the problem isn't with those values, it's with how some people are trying to distort the meaning of progress." A round of applause erupted, louder this time. Marcus realized that this was no longer just a debate between him and Harris. It had become a message that was resonating with the audience. Marcus bit his lip, scanning his notes once again, but Harris wasn't giving him the chance. She turned and addressed the audience directly, as if she were speaking to them rather than the host. "I believe in change, but that change must have purpose, must be grounded in truth, not empty slogans or fleeting political movements. And if someone tells you that in order to move forward you must abandon the values that made you who you are, then be careful, because that is not progress, that is manipulation." This time the applause wasn't just from the audience, it came from some of the production crew as well. Marcus glanced around, seeing the shift happening right before his eyes. Harris wasn't just winning the debate. She was convincing people who initially disagreed with her. Marcus swallowed hard. He needed a decisive blow. But in that moment, he realized he had lost the most important thing, the control of the conversation. Marcus tightened his grip on his pen, feeling the balance of the discussion completely tip in Harris's favor. He couldn't let this continue. Taking a deep breath, he tried to regain his confidence and switch tactics. "Mrs. Harris," he said, trying to keep his tone sharp, "you talk a lot about tradition, morality, and family values, but haven't those very things been used to justify outdated, even unjust policies in the past? Doesn't America need to move forward without being bound by these old ideologies?" The studio fell silent. It was a bold move, striking directly at Harris's argument. But she didn't flinch. Harris gave a faint smile, her sharp eyes filled with confidence. "Marcus, there's one thing I firmly believe. History is not a shackle, it's a lesson." She paused, allowing her words to sink into the minds of the audience. Values like family, patriotism, and faith, they are not outdated, they are the foundation. If there were mistakes in the past, we don't erase the foundation. We learn from it and improve. If we discard every traditional value without understanding why it existed in the first place, that's not progress. That's losing our way. Applause echoed throughout the studio, but Marcus wasn't ready to concede. He leaned forward, making one last attempt to regain control. "So, do you think America needs to change or not?" Harris met his gaze directly, unwavering. Of course, America needs to change, but not by destroying everything to chase fleeting trends, by preserving what is good and making it stronger. The audience rose to their feet in applause. Marcus knew he had lost. Marcus swallowed hard, realizing every avenue of attack had been dismantled with precision. Every question he had planned to put Harris on the defensive had instead become an opportunity for her to reinforce her conviction. "So, Mrs. Harris," Marcus said, still trying to maintain his composure, though unease had begun creeping into his voice, "if you claim that traditional values are not outdated, then how do you explain the rapid changes in modern society? Don't you think America is entering a new era where old ideas must be replaced?" A slight smile crossed Harris's face. She leaned forward, her gaze steady and unshaken. "Marcus, real progress doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from building the future upon the best parts of it." She paused for a moment, letting her words settle in the stillness of the studio before continuing. "We cannot pretend that values like family, morality, faith, and patriotism are obsolete just because some people wish them to be. These are the principles that carried America through wars, economic crises, and countless other challenges. The question is not whether we change, but how we change while preserving our identity." Another wave of applause erupted from the audience. Marcus clenched his fist, sensing that he was rapidly losing control. He tried once more, pushing a more aggressive angle. "But don't you think that makes you conservative? While the world is moving forward, you're advocating for holding on to traditions? Is that truly the right path?" Harris didn't flinch. "Marcus, conservatism isn't about preserving values. It's about refusing to learn from history." The room fell silent. Progress isn't a race to abandon our identity the fastest. It's a journey where we choose the best things to carry forward and discard only what truly no longer serves us. Those who call me conservative should ask themselves, are they really moving forward, or are they just running away from their roots? Marcus took a deep breath, realizing he had no escape. Harris was not just answering questions, she was educating the audience. And they were listening, not to him, but to her. In a world that is constantly evolving, many believe that progress means completely discarding traditional values. However, the debate between Kamala Harris and Marcus revealed a profound truth. True progress is not about abandoning everything, but about knowing what is worth preserving and what must evolve. Today, debates often become battles where each side fights to win rather than to understand. But standing firm in one's beliefs doesn't mean being stubborn. It means having the humility to admit when one is wrong and the courage to defend what is right. When faced with challenges, don't fear change, but don't change simply because others pressure you. Think independently, seek truth, and never let temporary trends shake your core values. Because true progress isn't about running from the past, it's about using it to build the future. The most important lesson: listen to understand, not to rebut. Change to grow, but never lose your identity.